I'm Zach Bird, and this is my podcast. Today, I just wanted to very briefly discuss Senate Bill 2, my opinions on it, and what I think could change, the potentials it has to change things for us as a community in Texas, and what changes need to happen to improve the lives of Texas citizens. Unfortunately, my speaker had to cancel as some personal things came up with her, so I'm going to be just talking this out with myself. Today, I just want to talk about the Senate Bill 2, and the impact it's going to have on Texas citizens. The political parties that were in support of it, how it went through legislation, and how it could have been stopped if education was a federal thing instead of a state-based thing. So, firstly, I wanted to mention the branches of government and how they are directly influencing the law and how they were involved in passing this new Senate bill. So, this was proposed obviously a long time ago. It's been very heavily commented on by people federally, people locally, but here locally now it has currently been passed. It was very heavily influenced upon by the governor. Governor Abbott was pushing this extremely hard. And in my personal opinion, and based on people we spoke to in class, he had some sort of monetary incentive. Based on people I've spoken to, like, what's the senator's name? I'm blanking. Drew Darby, excuse me. I spoke to him when I went to the Capitol this year. And it seems like there was a huge monetary incentive on getting him out of office. He's been actively opposed by the governor, as we've discussed in class as well. And there's monetary gain here for people that are behind the scenes pushing this stuff forward. So the way this could be overturned, in some ways, this could be actively discouraged and potentially even overruled, is Senate Bill 2 I'm speaking of. Courts could have a huge impact on this. If somebody makes a lawsuit against this with a genuinely justifiable argument, for example, we've discussed how education is a fundamental right of Texan citizens. And I believe that without proper legislative control over this and like oversight from the IRS, for example, to make sure this money is being spent in a proper, good, safe manner, I think this could very, very, very quickly become a big issue. So, as we've seen with the new administration, IRS workers have been cut drastically. I think it was 50%. Let me check real quick. I believe it was 50%. So after doing some research really quickly, it was actually 11%, much smaller number than I thought it was. But for revenue agents, so those people that actually conduct the audits and look into what people are doing, that was over 31%. So that's pretty incredible. That's pretty remarkable. Massive cuts of people working on auditing citizens and companies. So that could be a huge issue if people are given this huge amount of money, this stipend of $10,000. What if they can't afford to buy food or something like that? If, for example, if they can't afford to buy food and they eventually are just like, you know what, I would prefer having my kid fed. I would prefer that over sending them to school to get an education, because Maslow's hierarchy of needs, survival is fundamental. That is the most important thing. Next up comes education. So if that is not audited properly by the IRS and is not watched carefully to see what is done by that, because there are going to be slips through the cracks. There's always been slips through the cracks. And now with such a drastic decrease in revenue agents, that could significantly impact the way this money is being spent. So the income of American citizens could be just going to, I don't know, for example, food, or if these people find a way to get this money into cash, maybe even it's spent on drugs, or even if they go to a grocery store in somewhere like Texas that can sell alcohol, they could claim it's food. It would look like food if they got taken to court for it, but it's actually just alcohol on the receipts. But it was spent at like an HEB or something. So we are creating an avenue for these addicts to that really should not have children at all. That's another whole issue that we could spend tons of time with that, talking about that. But that's another avenue that they can use to abuse substances and worsen their lives and the lives of their children. So what this becomes an issue of is it feels like this is just a grand, huge mistake, fundamentally. If this is not properly watched over, and if people do not take the time to properly assess where this money is going, because there are so many people in Texas. There's so many people here. With there being nearly one of every three households is a family with a child under 18. With that being the case, there are so many parents that are. It becomes a huge issue. You can't allocate all those resources unless it's done properly. Which honestly, in this current administration, I don't know if that's something we can entirely count on. It's not even necessarily the fault of the administration, which personally I believe there is a lot of issues with that. I think the cutting of fundamental government workers like revenue agents, especially, that is such an influential, important role. The cutting of that is dangerous and scary. There's no telling what impact that could have on the spending of that money, that income. So, how do Texans feel about the bill? Me personally, I am not a supporter of it because of the recent reasons I just previously stated. The potential impact on students that currently get an education, like me myself, I had a pretty rough childhood growing up. My dad tried to kill me when I was 14. I survived, fortunately, but I went to crap. Let me think about it. Um, I think 5 high schools, if I remember correctly. I went to 5 high schools and I barely made it out. But I mean, even when I was younger and I was still living at my dad's house, we wouldn't have food necessarily at the house because my dad was a drug addict. This is why it's so personal for me. Public education is so important for saving and being a safeguard for these children. These children need this. And if their parents are, like I said before, are allocating that income and spending it elsewhere, it could be devastating. It could be a fundamental decline in education and literacy, as we're already seeing. We already have a decline in literacy in students. My partner is a teacher. She's the one that couldn't be here. She has mentioned to me it is a rapidly declining issue. We see students not having the ability to read, the ability to pay attention to anything really for longer than 20 minutes. That's even a long amount of time for them. Longer than 5 minutes. It's a fundamental decline in cognitive ability as a result of social media. That's a whole other issue. But if we don't have those children in schools because they're not allowed to be there, either by parental issues, societal issues could happen as well. There's no telling that money could be spent elsewhere if a parent or if a family is in desperate need of that money and they get that money for free. They're going to use it on what's ultimately going to allow their child to survive. So we're going to have a gross amount, an extreme amount of children that are going to be uneducated. And I think that's horrible. That's horrible. It's a fundamental right for all citizens to be able to get a free education that has been well established for so long. It's horrific. I think it is a horrible thing, and I am very, very scared to see what this does to our country. So next up, I'm going to talk about the political parties and how they have been very divided on this. I think from where I stand at, I would consider myself a Democrat for sure. I know that makes me have a little bit of a bias here, but I think I talk about it very logically. I think I have a logical stance on this issue, but um, Republicans have very heavily pushed this. Republicans in office have very heavily pushed this, and I think it's because there's some sort of monetary gain to be had. And fundamentally, I agree with a lot of Republican sentiment, especially economically. But this is just bad. This is not there's no positive for this at all. It's been very divisive passing this. There's been all sorts of money thrown around, quote unquote lobbying. I consider that basically legal bribery at this point, as it's been used and abused in our political system. I think it's a fundamental flaw of our political system, in that the people with the most money can influence the laws regardless of what the individual wants, what the individual citizen cares about, because we don't all have that sort of money to throw around. Um, there's been a huge divide between this, with Democrats almost unanimously being against it, and a lot of Republicans being against it as well. But there is so much money to be thrown around that people don't feel like they don't have a choice. People like Senator Drew Darby, um, he was against the bill for so long, and Abbott tried to get him kicked out of office because of it. He actively funded a campaign against him so that he just couldn't let that slide. I believe Drew Darby felt that there was no other choice for him. He felt like he had to make that decision because there was nothing else to be done. If he had not made that decision, he would get pushed out again, pushed harder and harder and harder in the wrong direction. So he feels like he had to make that decision. And that is a fundamental flaw of this issue. I think that is where the huge divisiveness comes in, because the people on the Democratic side, I think, are not getting that same income and that same um, lobbying just because they're on the other side. The side that they want to win is obviously going to get the income. They're not going to give resources to both sides, even though that could be a good strategy. But the Democrats are not going to support what is being pushed, just because, honestly, even if they did get income from it, they would lose voter turnout because they would support something that is similar to the Republicans. That is another fundamental issue of American and Texan politics at this point in time, I believe. There's such a huge divide between Democrats and Republicans. I would consider myself even not even really Democratic, excuse me. I would probably consider myself a moderate, but people hear that and they assume that I am crazy, or if I'm not I'm uneducated. They hear that and they assume I'm uneducated. I believe there's a lot of issues with politics in this country and with the political parties, and I think this is a result of that. I think this Senate Bill 2 being passed is a massive result of that. Next, I'm going to talk about checks and balances. I already spoke on this briefly a little bit, with how if this was a federal decision, that this probably would not have been passed. If it was a federal decision, Texan government, if education was a federally controlled thing, I should say, if education was federally controlled instead of state controlled, this probably would not have passed. And I think that would be a grand positive for this entire situation. Um, Another thing I also previously spoke on a little bit is how this could become an issue for the state if somebody brings a lawsuit against the state with this. If they argue that this is unconstitutional, this could become a huge issue, and this could potentially overrule the bill. Hopefully that happens. Me personally, I think I've already established that I'm very against this bill. I hope that happens because it would be a fundamental positive for the American people, American and Texan citizens alike, because this sets a sentiment for not just people in Texas, but people all over the country. I think that making use of the checks and balances and the resources that citizens have will fundamentally change the laws, will fundamentally change our society, will fundamentally create a huge difference that we're not seeing now. I'm going to talk about that next. Citizen responsibilities. Texans, we typically have incredibly low voter turnout. It's bad for nationwide elections, national elections, but it's far, far worse for local elections. With there only being, I believe it was 57% of registered voters in Texas actually went out and voted on the national election, which is historically incredibly low. But it is way, way, way lower for local elections. Based on the resources I've read, it's obviously a case by case basis. We can't fully see every single one. It's not as easy for me to read that data. Based on my layman perspective, I've seen results as low as 6% of turnout for certain things, for certain elections. That is astronomically low. And it is the responsibility of citizens in Texas. If we want change to occur, if we want changes to happen, we have to get out there and vote. It is our right as citizens, and it is our responsibility. If we wish to maintain a good basis for our nation, for anything we do in the state, if we want positive things to happen, we have to get out there and make our voice heard. It is our responsibility. If we disagree with policy that's being pushed, we need to get that person out of office. And it is our ability as Texans, we can do that. Regardless of the campaigning of money that is spent to burst out this massive campaign, if we do our research and we spend the time to do that research, we could get out there and change the world. We could change Texas first, but gradually change the world. And to conclude this, I just wanted to talk about some of the main points I discussed briefly earlier. Branches of government, the rules of the legislation, and creating this law. We have to, as citizens, ensure that the legislative people that we elect are going to support our ideals. And if we can't do that, we need to make sure that they are not the people we elect. If they are not going to support our ideals and defend us as citizens, they don't need to be in that position. Governor influence, obviously, Governor Abbott was very, very, very pro Senate Bill 2, actively throwing money at it from every direction, getting money thrown at him from every direction. Obviously, Texans, I think unanimously, it seems like pretty unanimously, there's some people that I disagree with me. For the most part, people disagree with this on a gradual, pretty majority basis. I've spoken to some people that disagree with me, but whenever I ask them why and what benefit it has, they can't really give me a clear answer. So maybe that's an issue with me. I have not spoken to the right people, but I'm not sure. This is just I'm not sure. I don't have the resources to speak to that many people. I'm just talking to friends and people I know locally that are supporting of this, and they don't really have an answer for this other than it is their political side. I think there's a fundamental issue with political parties in this nation and in Texas as well, where we are so divided between Democrat and Republican, conservative. If we just muddied the waters a little bit and had more parties, like for example, countries like Germany, something like that. Something like Germany, yeah, that's a great example, I guess, but they have more parties. And because of that, they are allowed to vote for things they are more passionate about. For example, they have a party that is based mostly on nuclear. They have the AFD, which is scary, looking pretty fascist party that has ties to neo-Nazis. They have all sorts of different things, and that shows that there are more resources for German people to vote in a democratic election than there are here in the U.S. And that is a huge issue because we just recently, not that long ago, honestly, returned them from a fascist leader. I believe if we made those steps to create a more parties in the U.S. to support diversity in politics more, it would be a massive benefit to everybody. Checks and balances and citizen responsibility. If we find issue with this and we have the resources available, we can take this to the courts and try to fight this. It is our responsibility as citizens to ensure that we are fighting for what we believe is right. And if we are not doing that, then what's the point? What's the point of having the rights we have if we're not going to enact them? I feel like I may have rambled a little bit here, but I think I got my point across pretty well. I appreciate everything you've done for me in this class. I appreciate all the people we've gotten a chance to speak to and have the conversations with. This has been an excellent class, and I look forward to working with you more in the future. I appreciate all the things you've done this semester, and thank you.